This is E&P Reports from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcasts, digital, and all multimedia news publishing. And greetings once again, Mike Linder, publisher of E&P Magazine. As always, we urge you to follow us on the podcast platform of choice. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, please go below me to that subscribe button, hit that bell to the right. You get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. I have Doug Phares, full disclosure, someone I've known now for maybe almost 15, 20 years. Doug, you and I worked together when I was a consultant in the old days, and you were managing newspaper groups. Last big position was, correct me if I'm wrong, you were CEO and president of Sandusky Newspaper Group, a very interesting group because you had a medium-sized market and lots of small markets and a few clusters to manage. Correct, sir?
Yeah, it was quite a mix, regionally and size-wise. It made a very interesting complexion for figuring out strategies that work.
Yeah, having to find scale between all these different market sizes. You also were a group president for Boone. You worked for Copley for a while. Currently, you're managing director of Silverwind Enterprises, board chair for the Professional Association of Résumé Writers and Career Coaches. But you do not list on your LinkedIn profile the most important part of your career. You are now a 2-year going columnist for the famous E&P magazine. Are you embarrassed about that position, Doug? You just don't want anyone to know?
Sometimes I'm a little lagging on my LinkedIn profile, and the folks in the PARC, the Professional Association where I'm on the board, would yell at me for that. But if you dig way back, you will see that one of my early honorariums was a column award for best columnist from Michigan Press Association. That was more than 20 years ago. So it was nascent, Mike.
Your columns for E&P, you've got fans now. You are actually one of our most popular sections. We get a lot of social media interaction. We get a lot of comments. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend some time doing the best of Doug Phares, a column we call the Corner Office, C-Suite Executive Advice. And I'm going to do some speed dating rounds with you on some of your best advice over the last 2 years, right after we get this message from our sponsor.
This episode of E&P Reports is sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide are asking the same question. How do we accelerate the growth of consumer revenue? Traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way, costing you money. IQ Audience Plus by Town News is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers you to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Ready to supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income? Visit townnews.com/EP today to learn more about IQ Audience Plus by Town News.
All right, Doug. So as I mentioned earlier, you are a columnist for E&P. We started you, well, let's see, you have 25 now published, soon to be 26. If I do the math correctly, you do one a month. That's a little bit over 2 years, I believe now.
Sounds right.
We brought you on board 2.5 years ago, or 2 months ago, to help us give advice to C-suite executives, because that is our audience, and that's what you did, having to understand all facets of the industry, all the way up from keeping the building warm or cold and keeping supplies to making sure the best journalism is coming out of the newsrooms. And you've done, and I'm going to give you a little kudos, a stellar job. I mean, the columns you've been writing not only get great views, if you want to use the metrics and engagement, but they're timely advice. It's not like it's not something that you just want to read that month. You can go way back and get some good ideas from you. So with your kind permission, sir, I'm going to bring up some of what I think was your best advice over the last 2 years, and I want you to amplify it a bit. Is that okay?
Mike, absolutely. One of the things, I think one of the reasons that the advice is timely and applicable, so much of it is built off of 20 some odd years of management experience, combined with the fact that I'm working with small business now. I own several, and I consult for several. And the reaction speed and time in a small business entity is huge. They're seeing customer change, they're seeing staff change, and we have to react and discuss. And that really does apply up and down the food chain. I have been amazed at how experiences in so many different industries become universal advice when you start to overlay them with the broad history of a 30-year perspective. So I think that's where some of it comes from.
And now you're in the consultant. You consult businesses. You hung a shield. I remember when I became a consultant, 21, 22 years ago, I got advice from one who said, here's what people think of consultants. You're someone that meets with the client. They ask you what time it is. You get their watch and you tell them the time and you say that will cost you $10,000. Wait a second, I'm not done. If they don't blink, you say a month directly afterwards. But that's not really what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the timely advice you would give someone in a management position, which is 3/4 of our audience, based not only on how you're consulting all forms of business now, but your background, which was extensive in the news publishing business. So here, I'm going to start off with, you did a column which I call on perception, and your lead is amazing. When was the last time you called your own phone system? This was written like, a year and a half ago, but this is so timely because I try to get a hold of publishers now or people, and I get these ridiculous, what did you really try to mean by that?
How does your customer see you? I really don't think people that are in the corner office or in management roles, if you're not frontline with a customer, you really don't understand their experience. You think you do. You might hear it filtered through staff or salespeople, but the customer experience is very different than you think it is. So you need to approach it, or you need to hire people or ask people or have your kids try to experience your product from their side and get unbiased feedback on what's happening. What do they like? Where's the friction? What's stupid? And filter that back in. On a daily basis, one of our companies is the tourism business, and at least once a week, I will bring out coffees or Cokes or Monster drinks, whatever it is that kids do these days, and just ask them about phone calls they've got, what customers have been saying, what are you hearing? And it can really influence how you choose to go to market on a dynamic basis. It's about listening with a different set of ears.
I remember back in my radio days, if I can chime in, when I was managing radio stations, I got great advice from a consultant in the 80s that said, every month I want you to bring in one of your advertisers and have a frank discussion with your sales team. What they think, first of all, learn about their business, the words they use, the terms, and then what they think of media in general. What are the sales reps that call on them? What are they talking about? What's going on? So you can be in a customer interface mode the moment you leave the building. I found that to be invaluable. It really, it raised the game in my sales team.
Oh, a lot of wisdom there. It's just really understanding it from the customer perspective.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one in our speed dating round here. You wrote a column. I didn't put the dates next to these, but this was a while back. And I call this one, the topic being, I changed the topics because your headlines are so exciting. This one would be more on overpromise, underdeliver, or promise and deliver, where you talked about a Big Mac presentation. You asked your staff about what they think they're expected to deliver. Identify a work group that performs well and have them explain the standards. And you're giving me some faces. Those of you that are listening on Spotify didn't see that, but why are you smiling when I say that?
That advice dates back literally to high school. And the first real presentation I had to do in a college class was about a process. And I sat down and I thought it through. My roommate at that time and I worked at McDonald's. And we would get into contests over how fast we could make these creatures, these Big Macs, many pieces. They were sloppy as crap. But we didn't care because we were competing against each other for how fast we could do this thing. One day I went up front and I happened to eat one of them. And it was garbage because the stuff was everywhere. Your hands were messy. Burgers were partly cold. And, as a 16-year-old kid, I don't think I cared. But it kind of came back to me as I started to be in the business world about, it's about what it tastes like and what it looks like, not what you think you're delivering.
So basically, understand the final product and see it in the eyes of the customer. In other words,
how's it taste?
Yeah.
How's it taste? How's it smell when you're consuming it?
I mean, I used to do that all the time when I was analyzing, my jocks and our programming. But I think that how do you look at your front page of your paper or your home page with a consumer's eye, or are you looking at it as the boss? But I mean, again, it's just step out of yourself, right?
So a regular part of my publishing career, and this was when I was a publisher and then even as a group manager, would be to grab a red grease pen. This is back in the analog days, but go through a newspaper and mark it up as to how I felt about it. And it was most effective, I always believed, when I would grab a week's worth of papers from one of our entities that I wasn't involved with in a community I didn't live in. And I'd write questions and make comments and send that package of materials to their newsroom. And I got hate glares back because I challenged placement and content choices. But I was looking at it as a consumer who lived in the community and not as someone who's living in a newsroom. And it made a big difference.
I did some math on your columns about topics. And what I love about when you write, you sometimes go off in one direction and you go off in another. It's always, and my wife loves it. My wife's head of editorial. The idea came from Robin to interview you because she said, this guy really is funny. This guy can really get a point across with be captivating. So you're a good writer. But you do, I'd say, a third of your columns, when you really boil it down, are on management productivity. That must be something near and dear to you, correct?
It is. The manager is either the block or the flow. So good management is about getting the job done, getting it done well, and it's harnessing the thoughts, experiences, and resources at your disposal. I don't care if you've got one kid up front taking orders and you're in the back as a cook at a short order place, or if you're managing 1,000 people. It's almost harder with 1,000 because your job is not some high and mighty thing. Your job is making sure that people on the front line can do their work. And that's hard. It's harder than you think it is.
So I'm going to run down some productivity columns. And I pulled, I think this is, I'm actually pulling out of 6 different columns now. One of the ones you recently wrote got a lot of comments, good and bad, which was good. I like it. I like interaction. I love it.
If they're yelling at you on both sides, that means you've hit something.
Yeah, exactly. I always say the opposite of love is not hate; it's indifference. I'd rather.
Agreed.
What one publisher once said to me years ago, he said, "If I'm standing in line at McDonald's and the guy in front of me loves me and the guy behind me hates me, I'm doing my job. If neither of them heard of me, might as well quit." But let's get into the first thing, and it was a recent column. Are you managing or doing? And I love the graphic we pulled. It was the ants. One ant, with the others. But are you carrying the stick, or are you? So why did you want to define that? Because I have met managers. I've met some top level people who says when they promoted me, I have trouble getting away from the minutia. Is that what you're trying to say? And get into that.
Absolutely. So the key in so many, or what happens in so many businesses is you take somebody good at a thing and you put them in charge of a group. And suddenly the group's supposed to all be good at it because that person was good at it. The ability to do is not the ability to manage and organize and direct. They're very different skill sets. And you really have to make sure you're filtering what you're choosing to do if you're a manager, a leader, a director, a CEO, through the filter of, am I facilitating and getting this work done through others, or am I just doing it? And I fall back. I mean, it's a pit I fall into all the time, Mike. I find myself doing, and I have to remind myself a lot, teach, direct.
My background, as many know, is 22 years of sales consulting only. I was only in one of the many facets of the news publishing industry, but my heart would sink when I would go into an organization for the first time and see that they promoted the top biller to sales manager and learned that the skill sets that made this person a happy, successful, ego.
Their motivator,
yeah.
Right? Their motivator was the kill, the win, the success. And suddenly you put them in that admin role and you take the light out of them. I've done that several times, and you lose more than you keep. You keep in that case.
And then that person
end up leaving.
And they don't even get the whole idea of a good manager. I mean, I always use the example that in a football team, the coach stands on the sideline wearing a tie, crossing their arms, and watches the games, and then advises during halftime or on the sidelines. The coach doesn't go in and kick the ball. If you're out on the road with a sales rep, and you don't think the sales happening, you just step in and close it. You think you're doing the rep a favor, you're beating the rep down. It's hard to close that ego down. And sometimes it's hard, I've seen, for that manager to accept the fact that 1 month a sales rep might make more money than them. And you see, they just don't, it's a different mindset, isn't it? The doer and the manager.
Absolutely. It just takes a lot of work and you have to think it through. And a lot of people don't. And again, I come back to my experience that even if you are mindful of it today and doing the right behaviors, it's very easy to slip and fall tomorrow into not good behaviors. So I bring a lot of the things I bring up in our columns are things I'm experiencing, personally. I'm seeing in my businesses or I'm hearing from customers and clients. So that one was a personal one. I really was falling into the old productivity trap.
You wrote an entire column, which I loved, about sharing financials, but I want to change that topic, sharing data, because it's not just, I know as the CEO or the publisher or the owner, you're looking at spreadsheets all the time. You're looking at P&L, you're looking at top line, bottom line, EBITDA, and your mind is focused on that. But are you looking at all the data and then sharing it responsibly as a manager? And how to share it, which is another art. Don't you agree? So what were you trying to say through that column?
Well, I think you just nailed it, Mike. So tons of data, tons of information. You can drown in it. Is it useful and is it serving you? Case in point, went into one operation. My first time there talking to a publisher who'd been in the role for 20 years. I had their whole financial data pack. I looked at it and I said, why do you get this report? And what do you do with this one? Just talk me through it. They couldn't understand all that stuff. Like, well, that's the one that they were doing when I got here 21 years ago. It was some obscure metric that didn't matter anymore. But every month he would look at it, devote time to producing it, and then put it aside. Like, that's not serving you. What's serving you? We went through their entire stack of things and threw out half of it and said, these 11 things or these 12 things or these 2 things are what's going to drive your business. All these other data points are interesting, and on occasion, you should sit back and take a look at it. But what's driving your business? Most organizations, most entities have a couple of big drivers. If you're Apple Computer, the iPhone is still the big dog.
Right.
They have 300 products. I don't know what it is. The iPhone. So when Tim Cook gets up in the morning, iPhone sales are the thing he thinks about, and then he thinks about everything else. So that's the key, Mike. What's driving the business? And if you're on a cost side person or an expense side or production side, anywhere, what are the couple of big inputs you can control? Don't obsess over the bill for internet. Don't obsess over the bill for electricity or things you can't control. Focus on that which you can.
You also, in the same column, give advice that maybe you're not sharing some of this as a motivator to the team. And I found that fascinating because a person that just gets the sales rep that just gets their monthly report, you're 22% away from goal, but doesn't see other metrics they can work with. You say to the manager, and I'm not paraphrasing, I want you to help me with this, look through this and find something you can share that will help improve the productivity of the team, correct?
Yes. People don't show up to work wanting to fail. People show up to work wanting to succeed. Most everybody does. The team, the manager, demotivates people. We use data as control. We use me having information that you don't have as I'm more important than you. Let's bring people into the big picture of how this business survives and thrives, because then you are part of a winning team. So involving people in the bigger picture without weighing them down with 1,000 data points, it's an art form, Mike, and it's one you can practice.
One of my favorite publishers, or I should say organizations, is Hearst, Connecticut now. We've had them on this program twice because they're always showing the best growth we've seen percentage-wise for getting digital subscriptions. And there's 2 reasons for it. One is the holistic ability of their news director, or she's a vice president of news. She has a background in both marketing, circulation, as well as journalism. So she gets the whole picture. But what she does, though, is she demands or begs from her digital team a flash report every morning on the previous day's, engagement, hang time, page views, stories. She even asks for local Google searches or searches on Google, and then she shares them in the morning roundup with believe it or not, with the news team. And it has improved the actual way that they're generating content based on data. And I thought it seems so obvious, doesn't it? But she's one of the few that's cracked that code.
Yeah, a lot of people just don't get it. I was accused in the early days of building websites by my web director of getting up every morning, dialing into Google and finding the most obscure metric or data point to ask him about. I mean, it's like almost every day I would get up and I'd look at this because we were building websites and trying to figure this thing out a while ago. He finally stormed into my office one morning after a 7 a.m. query about something, and he said, "Why are you asking me this? I spent an hour figuring this out." but I'm asking you because we need to understand all this stuff. And you and I are now attentive to this, and we can involve other people in the discussion. It was new. We had to understand it. We had to look at it every day. It wasn't something we could get to once a month when the report came out.
Okay.
I don't think he bought into it, but there you go.
One of my favorite topics you discuss, but his office meetings. I found this fascinating when I visited newspaper buildings. See, I was in radio, and radio was a very nimble environment. We were street fighters. We were getting crumbs off the table because we're number 3, 4, 5 in a local market. Back then, when Yellow Pages was dominant, then you take the paper share, then the local TV broadcast share. You're getting down to the crumbs. And my meetings in the morning were stand-up meetings, 10 minutes. I mean, just pass out some cash bonuses. Let's all get out there and go kick butt, take names. And I would go into office buildings with these big, huge newspaper companies, and every conference room was booked solid for the week ahead. I mean, and there was like 3 conference rooms per floor. And it was the most amazing thing that I just couldn't imagine. How you talk about how, well, I'm gonna pause and let you fill in the gaps here, but it's almost like you said, through COVID, we got a lesson on this, right? We figured out that maybe we don't have to have 1-2 hour meetings. We're just filling up all the time with an agenda.
So is what you're doing productive? Mike, a lot of it comes back to examining what you're doing and what you're spending time with. The software development companies should have opened all of our eyes, the concept of agile development, the concept of make a decision, work on it for a little bit, then reevaluate your decisions. In the moribund days of newspapering, the goal was keeping the monopoly between the rails. There was a very thin margin you could actually impact. To your point, we were going to get a ton of money. Don't take it off the rails. So a lot of people, a lot of meetings that justified a lot of existence.
You dabble in sales, and you did one column that got me I got a few private emails from all the sales masters I know. I've known many, and most of them were over 60 like me, so they're just totally useless at this age. And that was self-deprecating, which some people say is a fault or a flaw. But anyway, you called the article "Get to the Know," which again goes to productivity and sales. And I actually bought into this because I used to instruct sales teams: give me a yes or a no, and a no is okay. That's how I sometimes close the deal. But you're basically telling a sales rep, get to it and move on if you have to, right?
So how often does a salesperson think something's going to close, or they're working on it, or they can't get an answer or a confirmation from somebody? That's in effect a no. It's an undecided customer. That means you haven't given them the information they need to make a decision. So either figure out what they need to understand to agree, or stop wasting your time. Salespeople, it's all about getting to an answer point with people, and you don't win them all. So accept it and move on. At the end of the day, no one counts your sales productivity ratio. They count how many dollars you put on the books. So get those answers.
The reason I used to find that, and I remember I had to dive into, I rode with sales reps for years. I rode with a lot of your reps, if you remember, and report back with you. It was, I would say, and this is my advice, if I can throw some in, it's my show, I can do whatever the hell I want anyway. But I would say to a rep, what you're really doing is you're hiding from the rejection of the next call. You've already established a relationship with this person, adversarial or not, and you prefer going into someone that you've already gotten in the door with than to cold call the next 5. And sometimes I think they're just hiding from rejection of the street. Once you figure out that it's a numbers game, get out there and keep plugging, then you might be more apt to look at yourself with a higher, how should I say, self-worth, and say, my time's valuable too.
Absolutely. And please understand that get to a no did not necessarily speak only to sales. It's about making choices in your business. It's about product deployment. It's about where you're going to organize staff or teams. If you aren't making decisions, if you're using those conference rooms to have long chat, Mike, about maybe we should do this and maybe we shouldn't, it's because people are afraid to make a decision or don't have the information they need. You got to push through that and get to a decision.
Right, because your time is valuable. I used to scream at sales reps, you will not wait more than 12 to 15 minutes for an appointment. Because if you do wait 20 minutes, then where is your self-worth in the eyes of the buyer? I mean, I always leave a note. And if you really want to be classy, blame it on yourself. Get them to feel guilty. I must have misscheduled. I must have picked a bad time, but I have 5 other people to see today. And I'm terribly, terribly sorry. I respect their time. Please forgive me for leaving. You know, just nail it. I'm important too. Getting to a no is okay.
Absolutely okay.
A squishy place in the middle where you're just wasting time. I love that. Okay, this is one of my favorites because I agreed 100% with you. It got shared a lot, but it was basically, you said, throw away the COVID business plan. Look back to 2008. 2008, believe it or not, was my best year in the blender. I hustled.
Sure.
I went nuts. I became the most aggressive because that was when everything fell apart. If you remember, in like what?
Oh yeah.
One day market crashes, everything's going ballistic. We lose 2 verticals, like homes and jobs that day. And it kind of thinned the herd, if you know what I mean. It made the playing field a little, and I got very aggressive back then and picked up clients and went nuts. What you're saying now is don't think about COVID. Go back to that aggressive stance back in 2008. Yes, no?
Absolutely. So the market has changed, right? And you have to look at what the playing field looks like today. So things have changed, but that was a recession playbook. COVID was a pandemic playbook. So all the changes we've made, all the things that we're doing differently, we need to sort out what sticks and how has society changed enough that I want to keep doing this new thing. And I got to look back at how do I hunker down, to use a hurricane phrase, and make sure I can navigate my business through this. Where can I get aggressive and where do I have to contract very quickly? Get in front of it. Do it now. Don't wait.
All right, last question, because we're running out of time during this interview. My best topic, and it's a topic near and dear to me, because I'm not good at this, and that's why it's always good, in my opinion, to have a good partner in life, like a wife or a husband or a partner, or whoever, best friend, who helps you see yourself as who you really are. So I call this topic self-awareness. You know, the famous line, "To thine own self be true," because if you don't even understand who you are, it's hard for you then to develop the right rapport with other people and understand that critical interaction. So you talk about a book you read, I think this was a while ago. This might have been one of your first columns, Atomic Habits. And you made me read it. So tell me why this book, An Easy and Proven Way to Build Good Habits and Break Bad Ones by James Clear, was something so worthy to you, you decided to devote an entire column in a 140-year-old magazine because it was fascinating that you would pick this book.
Right. So 30 years of management skills, right? You would think I know how to do all these things. You form habits, you form patterns, you form paths, and you fall back into them all the time. This book really challenged thinking about how you go about doing your work, how you go about achieving and accomplishing things in life. And he provided what I thought was a fresh view on how to actually change a thing, substitute something else so that you can firmly fix the new habit and new process into your life. It's not about identifying, I'd like this to be different or that to be different. It's about how do you affect the change? Very easy to make a change for a day, a week. How do you make a change for a year? Those old patterns are hard. And I just really loved his advice. I've burned out on business books. Most of them I read the first couple of chapters and put it down.
The same here.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can't get through the first 2 chapters sometimes because I find it just too ethereal or too basic. But this one,
so that one really resonated. And one, I'm not sure if I wrote a column about it, is Build Your Own Story Brand. I don't remember the author's name. I've got the book back here. I really felt like it was a fresh look at how to understand your product set and how to communicate to a customer or potential buyer value through their eyes, not value through your eyes. So I would pitch that one. If I haven't written a column, I'm sure I will eventually.
This is the hardest thing because I didn't bring this column up because it was basic, but you were saying, are you listening to the people who are advising you? And that when you hire a consultant, what you're really doing is you're saying, I know I got a challenge here. I'm having trouble changing it because I'm Pavlov's dogs. The bells are ringing, Q stimulus, Q stimulus. We all know that. There's an old joke. I used it a few times on this program, but how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is only one, but the light bulb has to want to change in the first place, right? So the consultant comes in and tells you what you already know you're supposed to be doing, but hopefully from paying for it or having someone scream it at you, then you finally make the change. But change is everything. It's the hardest thing to do, but once you make that change, there's so much opportunity. We just get into these habits over and over.
Oh, absolutely. And listening to the outside voice is hard. So I've got two examples. One, I had an onboarding call with a potential client. Really good call. Talked through a lot of things. They hired me to do a very brief look at financials, give them some advice back, and I said, X, Y, and Z probably needs to change if you're going to get there. And silence. Then after that, crickets. And about 2 weeks later, I checked back in, and that potential client, instead of doing any of the things we talked about, or even considering any of the things we talked about, simply said, "Oh, I hired a guy." The classic answer: "I hired a guy." So nothing will change because the ownership has not committed to any of that change, but they want it to be different. The other example I'll give, Mike, is frankly working with you in your group. So I inherited that contract and relationship when I joined Sandusky, publisher of the Sandusky Register, 1 million years ago. And I was told that for X weeks a year, Mike Blinder and his people are going to come in, you have to pay this much. I didn't have a choice in this. My boss, the CEO then, said, "You're going to do this." And I asked my team about how we used it. And they didn't like working with you because you wanted to challenge them on things. And so it was an unproductive week. You always came in. Your people tried to work with our people. They didn't want to work with you. It was unproductive. Not because your crew is not good, because my folks weren't embracing it. They said, "Look, it's costing me this much money and I can't get out of it. That's a thing I can't change. We're going to make this work." And I don't know if you remember, but there was a sea change in how our team started to engage with you, because I started to incent them on what we get done, what we get closed, the long-term value of it. And they started to pitch you on, "We want to do this. We want to accomplish that. We want to. And the minute that engagement changed, suddenly you were no longer the adversary. You were somebody that helped them earn bonuses and build long-term customer value. It's just two ways of looking at it.
I remember it well. You actually stole weeks from other markets.
Oh yeah, we started to buy out other people's time.
But you didn't mention, which is nice, because someday he may be listening to this program, but the real reason was the ego of someone in charge who just did not want to accept the fact that he needed to change. If you remember, but you came in and turned that person around. I don't remember how it all happened, but that's the problem. We all get caught in our own. Self-awareness is hard, isn't it?
It's really hard.
It's impossible. Self-actualization is a dream that we all want to accomplish, but it's just hard. But anyway, Doug, thank you for these amazing columns. I hope there are many, many more amazing ones to come. By the way, Editor and Publisher is now has a new vertical, editorandpublisher.com/corner office. You will find it now in our nav bar when you go into our exclusives category, and all of Doug Phares' columns that he publishes each month with Editor and Publisher, UNP Magazine, will be available to our audience. So thanks, Doug, for the great work.
Thanks for the time. Appreciate it, Mike.